I want to go into this a couple weeks back in your 5 month update, right? You talked about, I'm going to make a $20 million business. That's our goal, to hit
Yep.
$20 million
20
in
million bucks next year.
2025. So I want to kind of, you talked about like, well, it's simple. You just work from you work from the end and you go all the way to the funnel. I want to put you on the spot a little bit, and I asked you to prepare, right? I want you to show me, like, how do you do it? Because it's easy to say that, right? It's easy. I think just like any business guru can get on a thing and go, you just need a 10x it. Whatever you're doing,
exactly.
10x it, right?
10x
Like, but what does that mean? So I want to really put this to the fire, and how do we work backwards? What's your plan to work backwards from 20 million to, today? What's it going to take to get there? And I'll start off because that's a big open-ended question. The first thing I want to ask, though, is that's the end goal. If you had to walk it back just one step, what's the first step right behind hitting $20 million?
Yeah. So, well, let me elaborate on a couple things first before we start getting too much of that, right? Like when you first end up in a certain environment, right? You end up in a business, and lots of times when you would ask questions on like, okay, well, what's our goal next year? Like, what's going on? Like, what are we trying to do? I'm a goal oriented guy. Like, what are we going to go after?
Most competitive people are.
Yeah. I'm kind of a like, shoot for the stars and at least you'll hit the moon kind of guy though, right? Like some people want a goal. They're like, hey, I just want to make it 3 steps so that I can reach the goal.
Hit the moon,
right?
and that's it.
Like the Office on Steve Carell. Like my goal this year was to floss. Did it January 1st, right? Like New Year's resolution finished, right? Like, so like, and there are people that goal set like that. They're like, oh, I want a goal that's attainable. So I make sure I hit it. I'm like,
or they set like micro goals.
Yeah, exactly. There's all kinds of shit, right? But more often than not, you hear like, well, I don't know. Like it depends. It depends, like whatever, right?
Right.
And I got this a lot when I first got a legacy, right? Like, and so I just started setting goals. I'm like, shit, then I'll set 200 million. We'll figure it out and work backwards, right? So working backwards to me, right? I found most people do is they wait till the end of the year to see how much money they made. And that just seemed so backwards to me, right?
Yeah.
Like it's Nancy Pelosi's like, we have to pass the bill so we can see what's in it. Shouldn't we read it before we pass it in order to like, shouldn't we go the other way? Right. And so guys just run their business, and then at the end of the year, they count up the cash, right? Or lack thereof. And I always said, well, why don't you set like what you want to do, work your way backwards, break it down into the individual parts, and then you can tell if you're on track, like on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis.
Yeah. I see it a lot, and I call it like a lot of people are running their business, and at the end of the year, they saw how they did.
Yeah.
And very few people are building their business.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, the difference, it's our definition, the difference between running a business and building a business.
Right.
Lots of people can run a business, right? Yeah. And they have jobs.
They can do the day-to-day. They can manage
exactly.
the workload.
But they don't actually build what they want, right? They get what's given to them.
Yep.
And they're either happy with it or unhappy with it. Most people are unhappy with it, but then they'll go about doing anything. We're talking about business building, right?
Yeah.
And the one thing about when you set a goal, like, hey, we're going to make $20 million. Like for most businesses, it's not like, okay, 20 divided by 12 months, we're going to do $1.5 million every single month. And like,
if only it was that easy.
Yeah, because most businesses are either in growth mode, decline mode, or most businesses, lots of businesses are seasonal.
Yeah.
So,
no 2 months.
Yeah, like
exactly.
In Montana, they're plowing snow all winter, right? The snowplow guy can't be like, hey, look, in June, I'll make $1.5 million
I'll plow your
snow.
mud.
Like there's no snow to plow, right?
Yeah.
He has to make his money in the 6 months. And so he has to take his and build his business differently. Every business has those cycles, right?
Yeah,
those
on
things
and off.
that a lot more people are aware. Like in the financial niche, it's easier to sell in January than December.
Yeah.
Like just like most niches.
Yeah.
Like if you're in retail, easier to sell in December than January.
Yep.
So they all have their back and forth, but really ultimately you're building a business. In order to build a business, you have to know what the building blocks are, right? If you're going to build a house, you need to know what the building blocks are, right? If you're going to build a business, for us, there's four main building blocks. And I know there's four main building blocks or four main ways that we're going to generate revenue.
Got it.
And so what I do is I sit down, and every month there's, for each of my guys, right, there's four ways that we're going to generate revenue. And then the job is to ensure that those are getting done, right? So for in the financial niche, front end acquisition is a big part of it, right? Like acquiring clients in order to then turn around and monetize. If I want to monetize, I need to acquire clients in January to monetize them in February, March, and April.
Right.
So, but if I don't do any monetization events until September, then all I'm going to monetize is October, November, and December. I'm screwed, right? And it doesn't matter if I wanted to do 10 monetization events, I do them all in September. I still only gave myself 3 months to generate revenue, instead of planning it out across the year and saying, look, I want one monetization event, front end monetization event a year or a month.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to do 12.
About on, like, you can either monetize what you acquire, or you can acquire that which you can monetize.
Exactly.
One is doing it intentionally. The other one is like, all right, we have all these leads. How much money?
And then you have to figure out the timing, right? Yep. So clearly, a name that comes in January gives you 11 months to mess with him, right? A name that comes in September gives you 3 months. If you're trying to make money, in a calendar year, right? And arbitrarily, that's what we're doing, right? You're just a calendar year in it, but.
Well, let's go into the history of the calendar. No, just kidding.
But, I also know that in order to do 20 million, I'm not going to do a 12th of that in January, right? I know that for the most part, in our case, most of it's going to be backloaded in the last 5 months of the year.
Build to
like
it.
We're going to do 60% of the 20 million in the last 5 months of the year.
Yeah.
Right. So we're going to do 40% in the 7 months. So, or less. Right. And so, but you still got to do the same building blocks in every single month.
Right. I think one of the big things is you got 4 building blocks. One's acquisition. I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say another one's monetization, right?
Yep. Yeah, but we have multiple monetization methods, right? So, so I might say monetization, right? But I'm going to break that into the 3 things that are going to make the most money for us, right? Which is video sales letters, right? Is live events, right? I don't really call them live webinars because it's basically a 1-day build and a 1-day promo.
Yeah, they're live events or live training.
Yeah, or whatever, right? So we'll just use the word live. And then webinars are one of the other pieces of it. And a webinar is different than a VSL, which is different than a live. They all have different promotional cycles. They have different revenue expectations.
Yeah.
They have different effort that goes into each one of them, right? And so, you plug those things through, and then for the live side of things, right? Yes, we have them on back end monetization, but I also have them front end because we have leads that you need to convert.
Yep.
And like we talk about over and over again, I know I probably bring it up once every 3rd or 4th podcast. Like the job is to provide as many ways for your person to buy, because everybody buys differently. Some people buy direct mail. Some people want to write a check. Some people want to pay cash. Some people want to talk to a sales guy. Yeah. Some people don't want to talk to anybody, right? Like some people want to listen to a 90-minute presentation before they'll buy.
Some people want to read.
They just want to read the order form.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Like, and the point is that you're trying to allow people to buy in the method that they want to buy. We know for us, the 2 main ways on front end acquisition are a video sales letter, right? So a email or text or whatever that drives somebody through a 45 or 60-minute presentation, pre-recorded, that then gets an end goal. What we call a front end live, which is a much more editorially driven message, right? Which is much more timely, like Trump bump or Fed meeting or jobs report on Friday, right? Like, so it's a much more timely, it's a little more what I call editorially driven, right? It's a little more conversational in the beginning with then much more, maybe a little bit of a scripted close, right? Like, hey, here's the 7 things that you get when you buy our product.
Right.
And then an open Q&A, right? Which allows people to ask the questions that they need to ask in order to get it.
People severely undervalue Q&As.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to ask you this. So your plan is to do 12 million in the last 5 months, 8 million in the first 7.
Yep.
Right. What needs to be true for that to happen? Like, do you look at it like a funnel? Do you look at it like there's components of the business? How do you put it on paper? I just want to go ahead. Just, like I'm sitting down and I'm like, hey, I want to invest in your company, right? 20 million sounds great. I want a piece of that. And then I ask you the question, how are you going to do it? right?
Yep.
Obviously, the answer is not all at once. So how
Yeah,
are you
exactly.
gonna do it?
But it's still like that, right? So you're still 20 million. You've got to use one of two things, right? In our case, we're in startup mode. So,
Yep.
um, so I use what I consider very conservative numbers on what we've already done. So I know when we run a video sales letter, we'll make 30 grand. I'm like, okay, so as our list builds and gets bigger and we have more people on our list, we'll make more money. But if I still only factor it at 30 grand, then I'm being very conservative. So I'm like, okay, if I do 12 VSLs this year, that'll generate 360 of my
So it is like
$20 million.
components. You're like, here's essentially like, you're sitting at a dash and you're like, if I push this button, here's what happens.
Yeah.
How many times, if I hit this button so many times, here's what I think will happen.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. So ultimately, I'm like, okay, well, for each of my guys, I want one VSL a month. That means they've got to produce 12 VSLs, right? In order to get 12 VSLs, I've got to have 12 pieces of copy. The guy's got to go in the studio 12 times and record these things, right? So I have to get with him and say, hey, look, in order for us to generate the money you want to make, are you willing to go in the studio every other month?
We got it. We got to get a whiteboard because I feel like this is one of those ones where I'd love for you to just go up on the whiteboard and be like, boom, 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 write it out. So since we don't have a whiteboard though, you said you've got acquisition, webinars, VSLs, live events. So which one of those is the most the highest value per event or per thing component?
So the one that's probably the highest value really is the webinar, right?
Okay.
But on our list size and what we're doing, right, we're limited to how often I can actually run a webinar.
Yep.
Right. And so,
because that's like your big event, right?
Yeah. So it's the event itself. It's 3 to 4 days of follow up. It's outbound phone calls. It's text messages, right? Like there's a lot of moving pieces. Then it is like, hey, let's talk about AI and energy tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
Sending an SMS. I'm going
and here's
live
my slide
with,
deck, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot more moving parts. And so when you send a list about one subject matter for 3 to 5 days, right, or 7 days, just depends on what you're doing and how big your file is, right? Like you ultimately, if your file's too small and they hear about the same damn thing, right?
There's a thing of like you repeat the same message
Yeah.
and it increases the value or importance of that message because
To a
they're like
point.
they wouldn't be repeating themselves if it wasn't important. But like you said, then you get diminishing returns where it's like negative.
Yep.
They're like, dude, I already know, or I don't care, or whatever it is. And so yeah, you have to there's that fine line to play. And the smaller your list, like you said, the more the more people you turn off, like the bigger percentage it is of the opportunity.
Exactly. That's exactly true. Right. And so, ultimately though, I know that, hey, based on our list size and what we're doing, right, we can do a quarterly webinar, right? I do a quarterly webinar about the effort and everything. Ultimately in December, that webinar will be worth $1 million. Right now it's not, right?
Yeah.
Right now, if I do it, it's $100,000 webinar. And so there's no reason to do it right now, right? Because at the end of the day, I can do 3 other things in that same amount of time that generate more than 100 grand.
Yeah.
Right. So
the effort to value
yeah,
ratio
exactly.
right
So
now
webinars
is so
aren't
low.
even on my calendar, aren't even on our plan until September.
Wow.
Because right now, based on how we're building our list and how quickly it's growing and the other things are going on, there all these other things. To do a weekly live is way more effective than to do a quarterly
So even though
pre-planned
it's
event.
the highest value, like I said, the value to effort ratio is so big that you're way better off putting the effort somewhere else because
Exactly.
the output is so, while the value's not as much, you'll get way more output, which equals more
Exactly.
revenue. So you are planning on doing 2 webinars or per.
So we'll end up with 4 webinars
Okay.
when it gets said and done. Yeah, 2 per guy, right? So we'll end up with
So
4
you've got
webinars.
almost like 2 business units.
I have 2 business units, basically 2. You can see it as 2 products, right? Like we use editors, and the editor is the business, right? And so I have 2 simultaneously businesses under our umbrella. And so each of those guys, one's about a 4-month head start on the other. So we may only do 3 webinars. We're going to see if the one that's got the 4-month head start stays 4 months ahead, or if eventually it
You can
evens up.
speed up.
I can speed it up, exactly, because part of the reason why it was 4 months ahead is because of the tech and IP's warm and all the
You're
other
spending
stuff
all
that
the time on the foundation and not actually
exactly. So I think we can speed it up towards the end of the year, but I'm not counting on that. I'm like, okay, look, if he always stays 4 months behind, then we'll end up doing 3 webinars, right? And this is what those will do.
You said it. I'm just going to, like I said, try to put it to the fire here. So you think by September they'll be worth $1 million?
Yeah, I think by September those webinars, yes, I
So
think
you
we
think
can do $1
it's-
million.
You're counting of the 23. That's 15% of your revenue.
And possibly, right? Like so truthfully, right? I don't have a $20 million goal because when I built both individual business units, it actually added up to 32 million. Right? But
hold on a second.
So the reason why is that, when I sit down and I say, hey, or editor B, right? These are the things you're going to do. This is what I think it's going to generate. Here's our number. And editor A, here's our number. You put the two numbers together and you're like, well, that's $30 million. Probably not going to happen, right?
But I thought you even said you were using conservative numbers.
So that's what I'm saying. So somewhere along the way, I'm like, okay, like what I need to do is take these two units, right? I've got what I think is a fairly conservative number, and then I'm going to even be more conservative when you're projecting out, right? Because most teams in a startup mode right now, and when you've got stakeholders, you've got employees, right? You've got these two, the main guys, right, that get paid primarily off of results and off their numbers.
Yeah, off of their
right?
business unit.
Yeah, if like for me, I'd love to say, hey, 32 million, we'll hit 20. Great. Right? I'm there. But most people don't operate like that. I understand that.
So that's in your head, that's where you're at. You're like, we could do 32.
We could do 32 if everything lines up and goes perfectly.
But chances
are everything's not going to go perfectly, right? That we're probably not going to do $3 million on a webinar. We're going to do $1.5 million.
God.
Right? And so because that is the one number, like we haven't done a webinar yet.
Yeah.
And so that's the one number I've got to be like, okay, based on file and based on experience and based on file size and where we'll be.
This is speculative.
Conversion rates. This is what the number will be. Well, yeah, then let me be conservative against that number.
So webinars, the big, that's like the big juicy elephant, but really hard to like nail down exactly what it's going to look like. I want to ask you, which one do you think is the most predictable of those 4 building blocks? Which one do you have the most confidence in?
The one I have the most confidence in is the live events right now, right? The lives.
That's interesting because most people will consider live events unpredictable.
Obviously, front-end acquisition I have the most confidence in because that's what we've been spending all of our time and energy on, right? As a true monetization event, right, the lives. And the reason why is because we've run 3 of them. And so the more you run, the more you have an expectation. Okay.
At-bats.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so we've done a few VSLs. They've done okay, right? So, but not as many as we've done the live events. And so just based on that, as we get more at bats, obviously those confidence factors will change.
Yeah.
Right. But ultimately,
well, and the numbers change.
Yeah, exactly. But ultimately I know the lives were ahead, right? We're figuring out what works for us, what works for our marketplace, what works for our list.
You've gone to the plate more often so you know what to
Exactly.
expect. So I want to ask you then, because you said something really interesting, which is, you're talking about beginning with the end in mind, beginning with the end in mind, beginning and the end in mind. But you just said the place you've been spending the most amount of your time and energy in is acquisition, which is the front.
Yeah.
just got to point it out. That's the beginning.
Because so this is one of those things about knowing your marketplace. So in previous businesses I was in, right, front-end acquisition wasn't the be all end all, right?
Okay.
So when I was in the attorney space, yes, we gave away leads and we gave away books, but ultimately what really we focused on was, okay, well, how many people can we get on the phone? And so that was our be all end all. It was like, hey, if I can generate 7 appointments a day, right, over 4 days, if I generate 28 appointments, this is what's going on. And ultimately it's not necessarily about, hey, this is it, right? We both know in the financial niche that it comes in on that front end acquisition. I know
how many orders do you get?
How many orders did I get today? And I know that guy is worth this much money at day 90 and 180.
Yeah, which we went over in a previous one of the 3 important numbers. And it's probably why yours, mine was conversion rate. Yours is the order volume is the third most.
Front-end acquisitions, what CPA, how much money did it make you?
Yeah, lifetime value, cost per acquisition. And you're worried about order volume because it's predictive of how much revenue.
Exactly.
And if you're setting I want to make $20 million, here's what you don't know though, which is you don't know how valuable these guys are.
Right? So I have to use a little bit of experience and a little bit of a WAG factor and a little bit of what are we doing right now? What has occurred? Because we're not just acquiring and then monetizing. We are monetizing while we acquire.
Right.
And so,
like you said, it's not like you're acquiring in January and then you monetize February, March,
clearly
and then you go acquire again. And...
Exactly. Clearly, there's a lot of assumptions, right? And,
right.
And like I know I've mentioned on here before, right? The two things in business are what assumptions are you making, what don't you see?
Yeah.
And so every day that goes by, though, that assumption that had a 61% probability now has a 61.5. Now it's 62. Just like direct response, right? Every day the feedback comes in, you adjust. Feedback comes in, you adjust. Feedback comes in, you adjust.
Yeah.
That way, at the end of the year, you have a year's worth of experience instead of hanging out and waiting to see what's going to happen to you. Like I could easily just say, hey, I don't know. Yeah. We're in startup mode, right? Like that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like,
so I see where you're getting at, which is like I mean, to your credit, right? I know I'm grilling you a little bit here, but to your credit, like you did generate whatever, like $1.5 billion plus of revenue, right? So it's not like you're going in.
So I'm using some of that experience for sure. Right. Yeah. Like you have to, like we're all built on our experiences. Like, why do you think people go to college, right? They go to college for the experience and the knowledge so that they can then apply it in the real world. Right.
Right.
I'm using the knowledge.
It's the reason you go to boot camp before you ever.
Exactly. Right. You go to flight school before you go out and fly. Right. Yeah. Like I'm using that knowledge and experience I have but not being afraid to adjust it. Right. Like, because the world moves fast. Like this is a different business.
Yeah. What happened?
This is a different lead source, right? This is different guys that I'm using to monetize, right?
I just want to hit on it. I got to throw this rock. Yeah. It's why like some of these guys that are out there that they're like, I built in 2012, I built my business to all this, right? And I retired myself and I'm going to tell you everything I did. You're like,
yeah,
chances that what happened in 2012 could be repeated today. Like there are certain principles for sure, right? But like,
there are principles.
Sit there and try to actually coach someone on A, B, C, D. They're not going to be able to do it because they're not doing it today.
Exactly.
They're not building a business right now. They're not doing that thing right now. Like they're playing a different game. And it's like, all right, I used to play football. Now I play soccer. But let me tell you how I used to play football. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like chances are there's things you don't know.
There's a great book written by a guy who started a software company called The Hard Things About Hard Things, right? And the coolest thing I like about that is he's like, look, success isn't a recipe, right? Like they're not like, hey, he goes, because today's different than yesterday, right? Like we both know that sending emails in 2017 was easier than today. We both know advertising on Google was easier pre-2020, right? Actually, what open rates were before iPhone decided they were going to screw that all up.
Security thing.
Exactly. So there's all kinds of things that changed and adjusted. So it's not a recipe, right? There's a building block, or like in my case, like there's things that I use, right? My process, but it gets constantly adjusted. So at Legacy, I knew because once you'd been there 6 or 7 years, like we had a monetization plan.
Yeah.
And so I knew 800 front end orders, $20 million a month. Like, because the monetization was set in stone and we were at that like on the curve, right? We were not necessarily major growth, but basically we were that company, right? We were IBM, right?
Yeah.
Just plodding along, waiting for decline, because that's what happens.
Yeah,
right?
Stagnation essentially.
Yeah, exactly. You're in that accumulation phase, right?
Yeah.
And so I knew it, right? I knew inside out and backwards. It doesn't mean we weren't trying new things. It doesn't mean that it wasn't, and it doesn't mean 800 obviously made 20, right? 800 made between 17.5 and 22.5, right? Yeah. Like there's that WAG factor. And this is the same boat. Like I don't know what all those numbers are yet.
So I see the why now. You're talking about like, okay, I'm spending all my time on the acquisition. Is you just said like you already have all the monetization events planned out.
Yeah.
The only way those are going to work is if you have the acquisition,
the more people
to fulfill that monetization schedule.
Yep.
And so,
yeah, plain and simple, right? Like how many more people I can text or email, the more people will show up for the event, and the conversion rates are roughly the same.
Well, it's super interesting if you ask, like on the front end side of it, a lot of people will just like try to get the front end working. And then, like you said, then they spend all this time after that making money. And they're like, shit, now I got to make money on all this. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And then they spend their time making money. And then they're like, oh, shit, I got no acquisition.
Exactly.
And they run back over here and start spinning that plate.
Yeah, I'm going to say again, they're running a business. instead of building it. And you're
Yep.
like, I know everything I need to do to achieve this. And ultimately, you can't control every variable.
You can't.
But you're saying, if I do all these things, I'm giving myself the best chance of predictably, reliably achieving this number. And
Yep.
even if you come in under it, like you did the right things instead of it being a happy accident. And you go and I worked at this company back in whatever. And in January, we had a meeting, and the owner of the business was like, so what are we going to do this year? Like last year was crazy. It went really well for us. What are we going to do this year to repeat that success? And someone, without joking, and it still sticks with me to this day, they're like, whatever we did last year. They didn't actually know what we did last year. They don't know why it worked. They didn't know it. And like, it just hit me. I'm like, whoa,
Yep.
like the fragility in some businesses, because
Even
they don't know
businesses
why
Yeah.
things go up or things go down, other than, well, I'm doing the same thing I was doing last year or last week or last month. That's scary.
So I said this in 2022 in the financial niche in particular. I'm like, look, you have to work twice as hard to make half the money. That's what 2022 was.
Yeah.
Like, and you can sit bitch about it. You can complain about it. You can say, hey, this sucks, right? Whatever, right? They're
Yeah.
like, oh, I wish 2021 was around. Like, that's not coming back.
Yeah.
Like, that was an anomaly. That wasn't a normal year. That wasn't a normal anything.
Right.
So don't build your business on 2021, right?
Yeah, seriously.
You look at okay, well, yeah, some things aren't going to work. Like that's just the way it is. Like
Not every day
not-
does the government
Yeah.
hand out thousands of dollars
Well,
to your customers.
Yeah, exactly. Not every day can you lock them all in a room and make them sit there for 6 months and not have anywhere else to spend their money, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so many things that went on in 2020 and 2021 that aren't coming back, right? Real estate space in 04 to 08, not coming back.
It's funny you said you have to work twice as hard to make half the money. I told my team at the time, it's like, look, before we were swimming with the waves, right? I was like, now we've turned around and we
Yep.
are swimming into the waves. And I'd say I think yours is put well, but I'm like, look, one you go a lot faster. The other one, you still have to swim. You still have to struggle. And the fact is that, like, if you don't have the stamina to make it through the waves, you had no business being in the ocean
Exactly.
anyway, right?
Exactly.
And like easy times and hard times come and go. And if you only survive in one of those environments, again, very fragile.
And it was one of the things you see a lot of people that in our marketplace and in our niche that complained in 2022. And ultimately, I'm like, get over yourself. Like, you got to work twice as hard for half the money. So either decide to do it or leave. Like, plain and simple, because
Yep.
the reality is bitching about it or wanting it like it was before. Like, none of that's going to do anything. I
Well-
can bitch about the work, but I still got to dig the hole. Like,
Well, the other thing is a lot of people too, they look over and they're like, oh, thank God they're struggling too.
yeah, exactly.
Who
Exactly. Who
cares?
gives a shit what anybody else is doing?
Like whether your competitor is doing well or not doing well, like
yeah.
the
And the same
only
thing.
business you can control, the only business you can build is your business. Imagine that.
There was this lady that chatting with her about, and we were in a mastermind, and and everybody's doing their thing, and it was a butcher baker candlestick maker mastermind, right? Like all these businesses in one group,
Okay.
right? That a bunch of different compelling businesses. And at the time, right, we're building our business, and I think we're $5 or $6 million at the time, building it to 20. This isn't the financial niche.
Okay.
And you start chatting
And you're
with
just
her,
building
and-
everything to 20, huh?
You're on the way to 20. And but as you're chatting with her, right, you're talking about all the things you're having to do or whatever, and then you start chatting with her, and she's like, yeah, well, I invented the little I call them scrunchy thing that goes in women's hairs. It's plastic or whatever. We did 50 million last year. I'm like, you did $50 million on a friggin' hair beret, right? Like, I want to be in that business.
Jeez.
But the thing is, she had all the same problems we had.
Yeah.
Right. She had all the same type of problems, right? She still had to deal with employees. She still had to deal with supplier. Like she was still dealing with the same shit. And guess what? Her profit margin, same damn thing as ours was, 20 to 30%.
She was making, like you said, whether you're making a lot of money or you're making a little money, it's still hard.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to earn the dollar from your customer, because most people aren't walking around and throwing money at people and saying,
exactly.
like, I don't need it.
Yep. Yep, for sure. So, yeah, so that's what we're doing is we're building the business, right? We're working towards 20 million. We'll give you a bunch of updates next year as we're running along. Everything, the vast majority of the 20 million will be made in the last 4 to 5 months of the year. And but that doesn't mean you don't do anything for the first 8 months. You're like, oh, I guess I don't do anything because all the money's back there. But
it's still it's still 12 million versus 8, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're growing 50%, but to be able to grow 50%, you got to make the first 8.
Yep. Yeah, and if we do it right, we focus on acquisition, we focus on the things that we should be, right? We're growing our file size, we're treating them the way they should be treated, right? We're treating them like customers and not credit cards, right? You do those things.
That's good.
Ultimately, as we start to build our base, as we build a bigger base, we'll be able to everything we do will be more effective. Every month it should be more effective than the last month.
Yeah.
The same amount of work, the same amount of energy. Doesn't mean everything's going to work. No, because we're going to come up with ideas that suck, right? Like that's just the way it is. I looked at what we were doing and I'm like, okay, we got to come up with 52 ideas next year, right? Well, not all 52 are going to be home runs. Yeah. In fact, I can tell you 10 of them are probably going to be horrible. 10 of them are going to be great. The other 40 or the other 30 are going to be okay.
Yeah.
That's just the sheer math.
So I want to tell you this story. I was talking to your CMO, and I think what you guys are doing is freaking cool. Like it's a very, very cool thing. And I was telling him, I was like, man, like awesome to be in your position. I'm like, I know you have all the issues. Like I said, I was like, doesn't mean it's easy, whatever. I was like, but man, like. It's a lot of fun watching what you guys are doing and like hard not to want to jump in the boat because it's really cool. And, he's like, it's, even looking back 3 months, it's pretty impressive what we've gotten done, but there's still a lot to do.
Exactly.
And, like business is a flywheel. It never stops.
Nope.
Right. Like it's just whether you're increasing your momentum or decreasing your momentum. And one of the coolest things about business, in my opinion, one of the reasons why it's so fun to me is like it's an infinite loop game. It never ends. You're like, you don't just go and you're like, we reached the finish line on our business unless you declare bankruptcy. But like you don't have that finish line. It's an infinite loop game, which means you can win an unlimited amount of times.
Yep.
And when you look at it and you see like how many wins you guys have ahead of you, that's why I think it's so cool.
And it is cool, right? Like it definitely is. And this is one of the things, like I love the fact that we're doing this here because I really wish we had done it at Legacy because I think it would have been cool to be able to look back on, like I have the memories and I have the thoughts, but to actually capture it along the way.
Yeah.
As we sit down, like I remember having a conversation with the CFO and as 2019 was rolling around and for whatever reason, the telesales team was not part of the marketing team, which just was completely foreign to me because everywhere I'd ever been, they worked hand in hand.
That's true for us.
Yeah. But that's just completely foreign to me. And, I sat down and I said, look, if we made telesales part of marketing, it was worth whatever, $12 million or whatever. And he's like, oh my God, like that's,
we got to do that.
That's a 10% bump, right? He's the CFO. He's like, we should do that. And I said, yeah, but I've got these other 2 problems that are a bigger deal that are $20 million problems that I want to solve. If I focus on the $12 million problem, I won't solve the $20 million problem.
Yeah.
So as much as we had all the problems in our telesales team and all the things that needed to occur, and I mean, we have problems all over the place, right? Naturally.
Every business does.
But as much as all those other ones had to occur, here's another great example, right? I used to do a lot of live events, a lot of webinars, or a lot of seminars. And so we had to, we kind of put together a messaging to fill our annual retreat. And I knew I could fix the messaging. I knew I could fix the message. I knew I could fix the copy that went out. I knew I could fix all those things, right? But at the end of the day, we were only putting $400 in a seat. That's it, right? And so it was only a $600,000 problem. I literally spent 0 time and energy on that, even though I was super qualified to do it and fully lined up to do it. But because that same time and energy, I put it into something else that generated $10 million.
Yeah.
Because you don't have an unlimited amount of time and energy either, right? So those are 2 vivid examples from back there. And I think that's what's going to be cool about this is, we'll narrate, we'll figure it out. And as we go along, I'm talking right now about solving this problem or solving that problem or 20 million bucks, but in September, we'll see where we're at, right?
Yeah.
Like 9 months from now, 10 months, 11 months, whatever we are, right? We'll see where we're at.
Well, and the fact is, maybe you're only at 5 by the
Maybe
time
so.
you hit, but you, like I said, it's a momentum based game, and
Yep.
it's, and you go from 5 in the first 7, and you end up hitting the 20. You make 15 in the last 5.
Exactly.
You can't, you can't ever know exactly. But I think if you're listening to this, and you're in that phase, and you're like I said, God, I spent all this time running a business, and it feels like nothing's changing, or I'm not getting anywhere. Figure out where you want to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Even just
build a plan.
Pick a number
and then figure it out.
then say what has to be true for that to happen.
Yep.
And then I love the way you said, like, work it backwards, right? All right. I want to make $20 million. Here's the main ways I generate revenue.
Yep.
How much is
And don't come up with 10.
Yeah.
Come up with the top 3 ways
Right.
you generate revenue.
And they're like, everything's, there's always these sub ways you make money,
exactly.
and these rinky-dink things that add up. But the fact is, like, what are the 3 or 4 ways I can mainly drive it? Because you're only going to be able to drive 3 or 4 things at a time.
Yep.
Can't do 10. So,
and that's a great, that's a great way to put it. Because I went into, for me, I plan next year's in September of the previous year, right? I don't wait till
that's
December.
early.
I don't wait till January. Like, I start planning in September. And part of it's because you have to have that lead. If you don't plan it in September, January won't happen because you need 3 months, right? And so I remember sitting down as we planned out a year, and one of the things that our CEO at the time said is I'd planned out 1 webinar a month. I'm like, last year we did 1 webinar. This is what we'll do. And her question was, she goes, well, why can't we do 2? And instead of getting defensive, I looked at our list. I looked at what we're doing, and I said, yeah, well, let's do 2. Why not? Right. And I said, look, we'll try it out for the first quarter. And if it's great, awesome. Right. If it's not, if ultimately the second webinar is taken away from the first webinar too much, right, or taken away from the other things, then let's not do it. But yes, was 1 webinar a month. If we made $1 million on 1 webinar, we weren't going to make 2 on 2 webinars. We make 1.7, right? But that still was more than 1.
You can either do more or you can do better. Trying to get a
exactly.
webinar to be better by 70% is a lot harder than doing more of it and making 70%
Especially when your
as
file size.
much.
In our case, it was our file size was big enough.
Yeah.
And our idea as a collective, as a group, the number of ideas that we were coming up with were big enough that we could turn some of the things that we would typically turn into a video sales letter, we could turn them into a webinar. Because the idea was big enough. The idea was big enough. The knowledge was big enough. We had enough staff in order to be able to do it because there's a lot more moving parts. So I had to sit down and make sure all those were true.
Yep.
Right. And then we're like, well, yeah, let's do it. And at our peak, we were doing 4 a month.
Jeez.
Because we did a webinar every week on a different subject matter. And you just hit a different part of the audience. And we were segmented out in a way.
Right.
But when you've got, hundreds of thousands of paid buyers and hundreds of thousands of free buyers, like, you can segment people out
when you're in like percentage points of the population.
Yeah, exactly. Our webinars, we put more people on the webinars than show up for NBA basketball games. Like we literally, if we would go at the same time as the Miami Heat, our webinar had more people than fit in the Miami Heat stadium. I mean, that's just because our file size was so big, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not for any other thing, but we paid a lot of money to acquire a lot of clients. When you have a lot of clients, right, a small percentage of those will be interested in what you're after. And that small percentage happened to be bigger than fill in the fitness stadium.
Also, like, a financial pain is a big pain, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
One is like entertainment.
Yep.
You're like, some people want to be entertained and some people have a need, and the need was greater than the entertainment.
And there was a lot of greed going on in the marketplace at the time, fear of missing out, all those things, right? There were so many things that were lined up for us to take advantage. And that's why I say, like, I don't plan on filling stadiums anymore. Like, that's not what
it's
I'm
an
trying to accomplish here,
arbitrary,
right? What I'm trying to do in here at Centurion is do something on a much smaller scale that's much more boutique, right? So much more very unique to the subscribers, and provides a different level of of experience than what we did in that case.
You don't need a bunch of business units to be everything for everyone. You just need a couple guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Who can be something for someone.
Yeah, we're not trying to build Amazon anymore, right? I'm trying to build a much smaller version.
You don't want to generate another billion and a half in a couple years.
No, I do not want to do that again. That was fun once. And I think if I was 35, I'd probably be fun again, right? But I'm not 35, right? I'm the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
This is going to be fun, right? We'll talk about the experience as we go through here, but the big takeaway from this, like you said, is all right. Like it is, we're still prior to the year, right? This will get released prior to the new year, and or right around there, and just make a goal for what you think you're going to do. Work your way backwards, and especially if you keep it to yourself, like the first few goals, like I say, I kept to myself, right?
Yeah.
Like you knew them. Your mom knew them, but the reality is we kept them to ourselves because, if I sat down and told these guys, hey, we're going to go from 70 to 200 million, they would have freaked out, right? Let alone go from 70 or 100 to 300, right? Like the numbers, there was the COO was the only other person I used to sit down with. And to me, business is a math game. And once you've got the other pieces in place, once you had the 72 ways we monetize, right? Once I had the vast majority of those things in place, now it's just a matter of you put enough people in the front door, out the back door, know?
Yeah. I think that at the end of the day, like I said, I think what you guys are doing is really cool. I think a lot of people listening probably are going to think the same. And like you said, I'm excited to see what happens. And the fact is, whether you succeed, or you fail spectacularly, like there will be something to learn from it. And like I said, the flywheel is all about whether you're increasing or losing momentum. So it's not like 5 months from now, if you're not exactly where you want to be, the game's over, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's just a matter of working through it. And that's why, there's different philosophies when it comes to failure, right? Like guys are like, oh, failure is not an option. Well, I mean, failure is an outcome sometimes, right? Like I've experienced that.
Right.
But the reality is for the most part, one thing that I've done a lot more now is take a much more conservative approach to things, right? Not plan out so far.
Yeah.
Not set the expectations so high in certain things. And it's a matter of like the faster you can turn that feedback loop, right? The quicker you can make adjustments, the better off you are, right? So if you're flying from here to there, if you make 1% adjustments every 10 minutes versus waiting an hour, seeing where you're at, now you got to make a 7% adjustment. You wait 4 hours and now you got to make a 35% adjustment. You've gone way off track, right? Make micro adjustments all along the way. And in our case, we're doing it nearly on a daily basis, right? Off you go.
Awesome.
All right?
Well, we'll see you next week. Hope you have a Merry Christmas, and thanks for sharing.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks. Bye.